Jason Soares. I'm behind Aspects of Physics. Anything else? I was sort of a computer nerd when I was younger. I had got a Commodore 64 in junior high school, and that was my life for quite a while. And before that, I had the Sinclair 2000. That was my first computer, which was had 1K of memory. It was expandable to 16K, and it was like a speak and spell with a little plastic keyboard interface. And after, like Commodore 64s weren't very useful after when I got into high school, and they weren't very cool to be into computers. So at that time, I kind of got basically into music and kind of shunned the computer. I still had a whole bunch of friends who were into it, but at that time I was getting into more music and, punk sort of stuff, or whatever you would call it at that point, like post-punk, I guess, and was really into that. And then when I graduated, it was kind of like that was my life for a while, and just was playing music a lot and doing, band sort of related things. I played guitar and bass, and I went to Mesa, community college, took the music classes, but also took the really good 20th century music literature, which was, taught me all about the whole early, surprisingly good for Mesa. It was they have all the stuff like Schoenberg and Glass and Steve Reich and that, the contemporary neoclassical sort of people. And then and probably I think it was 94, the landlord who actually owns the house with my roommate, he was a total computer guy, and I hadn't seen a computer in years, and he had a Next computer, which was when Steve Jobs quit Macintosh, he started Next. And that was it's a Unix operating system, which is basically OS X is based on. Almost half of the widgets and stuff are based on that. So this was in '94, it was this Unix thing. And I was blown away that pictures look like pictures now on computers. I was just used to some crummy 8-bit, 256 color sort of thing. And so I was just blown away, and from then on, I kind of got back into it, and he also had the internet too at the time, which was kind of pretty crazy stuff. It was, that was the web browsers were in, I think, version 1 or 2.0. They had just recently had the tables capability under HTML to make, which was very advanced at the time, and I just kind of got into it, and then all the music stuff started happening, and it tied in with all the music that we were doing. The first few bands I was in were kind of typical, kind of indie rock sort of whatever. They weren't necessarily specifically genre based, but we're kind of experimenting, and then started getting more and more into experimental music. We started a band in '93 called Physics, which is the precursor to Aspects of Physics, and that was the idea was just basically one chord for 45 minutes, but it was improvisation with themes, but it was at the time not many people were doing anything like that, and it was 3 guitars, drums, and 2 keyboard players, so it was very and the thing is you have to change your whole perspective of how you dealt with it. You're not really rocking at that, and so it was a really cool thing to do, because it definitely was a struggle to try to do something like that, and so that was a big influence. And then let's see, where did that go? I was doing lots of other different projects at the same time, played in lots of different bands, and I guess the classical guitar training came in, but not that much. And then at the same time, so it's kind of a mixture between the playing and lots of different, just in the local scene of actually, doing the musician thing, and then being really in the computers, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh, you can actually record onto computers now and edit stuff, and seeing the possibilities of that, and seeing it so long ago, like when it first started happening, was like, this is actually a very useful thing to do it. So then for me, it was kind of a natural progression, like wanting to start implementing not just electronic gear, but actual computers into playing, because the possibility was you could fine tune things to such an extent that it was like, wow, this is a great thing we could possibly do. I guess I call it impossible leaps. This sounds that are just impossible, that you just there's no possible way for them to be made with acoustic instruments, which is, I think, an interesting stuff. And the for me, the thing that I think is interesting about computers is they're so good at making random. And for me, the idea is you set up some sort of situation where it creates some sort of random phenomenon or whatever, a process, and humans are really good at picking out what they like. And there's the human element. So, some sort of process that sets up like a whole bunch of like things, and you eliminate that down to a smaller set of parameters, and then you go, oh, about this one, and then pretty soon you're okay, I like these ones. And then but you could never have come up with it. And that's what I thought was such a great thing about computers. Which is, I think, it's taking the human element of stuff where it's like, it's like people, I know when I start picking up an instrument, it's like I gravitate toward the same things, like I start playing the same sort of parts or the same, way I finger stuff, but now it's turning in on the computer. It's kind of funny. I'm loading up the same programs and the same plugins and doing the same thing. And for me, it's always trying to find a new way of doing something to get something out of it, to expand the horizon and the palette of making of things. Which leads to the whole question of the dehumanizing of stuff too, where you're like, isolating yourself, which is a whole nother question. But yeah, it's true. I mean, the idea of like, hey, I can have someone else play my parts now, and I don't have to worry about them coming to band practice. I can just do it. But, the dilemma right now is ultimately a computer is keeping the rhythm usually, and humans are following along with it, and you can try to make the computer as intelligent as possible, but ultimately it's not as open. And that's the beauty of playing live music with people, is, the spontaneity of it, which is kind of the dilemma. The thing I've been talking about lately, which is the idea that with this technology, it's, in one respect, I don't want to use the word isolating because that has a negative connotation to it, but the idea of how everybody's kind of going into the bedroom to produce their music. And the one aspect of that is people make this music that's very relating to their emotions of what they're feeling and has meaning to them, but it doesn't really have a peer review process. And that peer review process is for me is the important part of music and art in a society, is that the relationship of the art, of how it exists. And that I don't know how that's changing, or I don't want to say that it's losing anything. I don't want to put a judgment on it, but I think definitely it raises the question of it. And it also adds the whole thing of where you have these programs, they're almost like, it was the phenomenon with drum machines, where it's the preset culture, where it's like, okay, I have this drum machine, I can turn it on and it does the calypso beat or the rock 16 beat or whatever, and you're just kind of tweaking it, and it raises the question of like, where is the creativity of that thing? And the more and more that people get computers and have all the access to the stuff, in one respect, it's kind of funny because it makes this whole preset culture that's very stuck in their reality of the thing, but it doesn't have much of a relationship outside of that to the community at hand. The thing with college is, especially like UCSD, like I know a lot of the people up there in like the experimental music program, there's a fine line between being a musician and engineer. Like a lot of the stuff, they're software engineers. They're not really musicians. They're just making things, but that has its own place, making processes or whatever. But once again, what does the meaning have to people at hand? There's an interesting concept of the triad of creativity, where every genre or piece of creativity has to exist with a 3-point system, where there's the individual, the medium, for instance, like the painting as its genre, and then the field of painting in the sense of like art galleries, and how those things balance. And when you put things in that concept where there's a 3-point system that are constantly relating, you can kind of put stuff of seeing where is the weight of that system. So for instance, if like where you're talking about the university, it's waiting on the person, and it's waiting under the idea of music, experimental music, but it doesn't have much to do with the community of the thing. It has with everything has its own aspect of that, but not, I just try to just view things in holistic realms. And when you lose sight of that, I guess it all depends on what you're going after too, because I don't want to make a judgment call on that, but I really like the idea of looking at things in a holistic system of like what does that mean? Like, if there's the concept of meme theory, which is the idea of genes, where you're passing through DNA, you pass on your thing, but there's also the idea of meme, which is a informational gene. It's like memory. I guess it stands for memory gene. Richard Dawkins was who came up with the book called The Selfish Gene. It was written like in the 70s, and the idea says is that the same way that genes process, you pass them down, information works exactly the same way, where the more robust and easier to digest piece of information, the more it will last. And so if you look at things in like that, it goes, what pieces of information, like the idea of baseball is a meme. It's a social concept that has been constructed, and everybody is making these social constructs, and what meaning do they have, and how do they go? And there's a theory on that whole thing of that, like, that humans are just the vessel for the genes or the memes, and like there's just these containers that hold it, and because they ultimately win out or don't win out, which is kind of a weird concept. It puts in question. I don't know. Well, just like most things, it's kind of complicated, and it's not a very clear cut. Usually there's some sort of rhythmic element that's involved, and I'll collect pieces of noise or something out of like a song. You'll be like, oh, I really like that sound, so I try to take it and modify it, because I really don't like to know where things are from, and I want to change something. Like I have a hard time. I can't use loops. Like I'm not into loops and samples of other people's things. I got to make it from scratch. So I'll go in there and find a piece of sound and maybe like manipulate it with different parameters and stuff. So I just kind of have a template of stuff. At this point, I have a pretty good set of templates of different rhythmic percussive elements that I can use, like, things that I usually just classify them as kicks, snares, and hi-hats, even though it might be like, or like a piece of white noise for a hi-hat or something like that. And I'll have that around. I may or may not use it. And then for some sort of like notation element, a lot of virtual synthesizer sort of. Nowadays, there's basically all the analog gears modeled in the computer, and you can just go in there and tweak it out. I'm always looking for some sort of process where it's like, okay, you take this and then you have the like some knob just hooked on through MIDI for like step parameters. Other ones, like, I try to like put together live elements too, like guitars, and like I play guitar in the thing too. So there's that whole element of things you're actually making, and say like, well, how can I take that and adapt it to the thing, or playing some sort of melody line on something and then recording it. Usually we record it in as MIDI, and then you can go in there and you can manipulate it. Like, okay, how about this, and then how about we'll transpose it and then make it so it plays this octave way up here and change the setting, you know, like, and I have synthesizers too. I mean, I guess it's whatever sound source you're picking up, that's the thing. It's like getting in there and coming up with something and then going, hey, this is a great process. Like one of them is on my Roland, there's the delay, it's a digital delay, and it malfunctions when you, well, it doesn't malfunction, it's just not smooth because it's digital when you change the refresh rate. So it does this clunking sort of thing, and I realized that like you could use that as a basically almost like a percussive element. So I would just have a song that all it is like the changing of that, and that would be the thing. I don't know, I guess it's just like anything. It's like hearing things in my head that I want to hear, or like thinking, I want to hear this, and no one's doing it, so I guess I need to make it. And then just investigating and doing things. It's like going, you know, for me, I like the idea of finding that balance between like live and, you know, like actual playing and some sort of computer element. That's, you know, I think what I'm trying to strive for. So that process, it's like, yeah, I don't know, it's not necessarily like trying to find a sound. Like I don't really hear a sound, try to recreate it. I'll go in there, I'll find stuff and fine tune it. Usually I wish I could do that. I mean, I've had songs where I'm like, okay, I have a melody in my head and then try to recreate it, and I can never get it quite how I want it to be. You know, it's always some sort of weird, like, you know, I can't quite get the timbre of the thing, so I don't even know where to start. But well, I guess first the question would be is the idea of it raises a good idea or a concept about music and ego and that whole thing of like, you know, like saying that I'm doing this thing and it has some sort of meaning out there, like forcing it on people. And it's always something that for me, it's really hard to like try to understand, because that's in one respect it can be a very gross concept. Does that make sense? Of like the ego thing, and I always I don't know how to quite deal with it, because it's like, who is it for anybody to say that they can do something and put it out in the world? I mean, you can only go by, well, I think that it's good, and you know, I'd like other people to check it out, but I don't know if that's quite good enough. I have this idea, this theory about music comprehension, that it's only a 2-bit process, and so basically there's of course it changes depending on the person who's listening, but there's the right note at the right time, the right note at the wrong time, the wrong note at the right time, the wrong note at the wrong time. And experimental music almost inevitably goes to the wrong note at the wrong time for most people. Yes. And it's like a quadrant, and depending on how into music are, your quadrant fluctuates usually down to the lower right hand corner. There we go. They just feed back on themselves.